Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another video for you, top 10 video actually, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books of all time, which is a very intimidating kind of video for me to do for what I feel like should be pretty obvious reasons. Narrowing down all of the books that I have read to 10 favorites is not an easy task. Narrowing it down to maybe 20, 25, that's pretty doable for me. Narrowing it down further than that to 10 is very difficult. It's hard for me to even in the past I've thought about doing this, and it was hard for me to even consider doing it because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. But I decided I could give it my best shot and at least provide a current top 10 books for you. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that's going to change a lot over the years. And even now, I've only been really into reading heavily for a little over 3 years now. And in that time, I have read somewhere in the range of maybe 140 to 150 books, if I had to guess. Maybe a little more than that, but about that. And granted, 10 out of 150 is a very, that's really narrowing it down a lot, but I feel like right now I haven't really read that much compared to a lot of other booktubers. So this list will likely change a lot in the next several years, and I predict, assuming I'm still doing this channel in a few years, which hopefully I am, this is the kind of list that I'd like to update every so often, maybe every year, maybe every other year. But right now, this is just where I'm at right now. So before I really get started into the list, first of all, I have a bunch of honorable mentions, but I'm not going to talk about them because it would take me way too long. But part of that reason, and the other really big caveat to this list, is I am limiting myself to one book per author, which also, obviously means one book per series. But in the case of Star Wars books, because I talk about those a lot on this channel, obviously if you've been watching my channel, I do a lot of Star Wars stuff, and obviously a bunch of those would be on my list if I were to not limit myself. I decided that I would allow myself 2 Star Wars books, one for the current canon timeline and one for the Old Legends, also known as Expanded Universe timeline. That way I could include one from each. But every other series, every other author, I only allow myself one book. So to get started with this list, I don't have this ranked because again, frankly, that would just be too difficult. So I do have these books in alphabetical order, but that doesn't really count. So starting in alphabetical order, from the top we have A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. This is the first book of the A Song of Ice and Fire series, which is a series I haven't talked about a huge amount on this channel, but I do enjoy this series quite a bit. I've read the first 4 books. I got partway through book 5 and put it down just because I wasn't able to really read it that much at the time. Would like to pick it up again sometime. But if I had to pick a favorite book from that series, I would probably pick either the first or the second book, but for this I decided to go with the first book. The reason why I love this book and this series in general is due to a few things. First of all, this series and this book have some of my favorite characters that I have ever read in fantasy so far. You get introduced to all of them here, or at least a lot of them, and the main reason I picked this book over the second book is because this book heavily focuses on the character of Ned Stark, who is one of my favorite characters in this series, and he gets a big focus in this book, and I really enjoyed that in this one. But other characters get some good stuff in this book as well, like Tyrion and Jon Snow, who are my favorite characters in the series, I would say, alongside Ned Stark. And it's just a great start to the series. Like, I think this is probably one of the strongest series beginnings that I have read. Like, every single character is interesting, really good intro to the world, lots of interesting politics. I never really considered myself to be that invested in politics in fiction. I can be sometimes, but generally it's not the kind of thing that draws me in as much as good world building or good characters. But I found myself actually very interested in the politics in this series and in this book specifically also. And I just think it's a great first entry to the series, great intro to the world, great intro to the characters. And it was just a book that I loved right from the beginning. And so that is why it places on this list. The next one that I have to talk about is a novella that I read last year called The Ballad of Black Tom. Now I am including this novella, and I also include a short story later in the list. Otherwise, this is all novels. But I include the Ballad of Black Tom here. This is a retelling of one of the stories by H.P. Lovecraft, which is The Horror at Red Hook, which is actually one of my least favorite Lovecraft stories and tends to be a lot of people's least favorite. A lot of people seem to not like that one very much. But I think Victor Laval, who wrote this novella, really did a good job of enhancing that story. This book follows predominantly characters who are Black in America in Harlem in New York, and really kind of focuses a lot on race and things like that, which is also interesting in relation to Lovecraft because of some of his views on race, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but really kind of provides a different look at that kind of thing and really focuses on a lot on that, as well as really interesting Lovecraftian elements that I really enjoyed. Really good world building. You know, this is one of those books where even though this is a real setting, you know, you're reading it and you feel like you're in that place. I loved the setting, the setting work in this book. And it's just one of those books that really deeply affected me when I read it because I was just so invested in it and I thought everything about it was well done. I love the character development. This is, you know, a 150-page novella and it packs such a big punch even in that short length, which I just think is wonderful. And it's one that I would highly recommend if you're a Lovecraft fan. Third one up, we have the very first Star Wars book to appear on this list, the first of two. And this is my current canon Star Wars book, which is going to be Bloodline by Claudia Gray. Picking a favorite canon book and picking a favorite Legends book also are both rather difficult, but I decided to go with Bloodline for my favorite canon book. Claudia Gray always writes great Star Wars books, and this is my favorite of hers, I would say. The way that, again, kind of similar to Game of Thrones, this heavily focuses on politics, which, again, is not something that I normally think of as being extremely interesting, but the way that Claudia Gray writes it in this book, the way that it connects to the plot of Leia, this is a very Leia-centric book, and her kind of in the New Republic government, trying to figure things out, was super interesting. The twist of this book that happens, which is kind of part of the marketing for this book, so technically it's not a huge spoiler, but I'm not gonna say exactly what it is just because I think if you don't know it, then it's good to go in not knowing. But the twist of this book, the thing that happens to Leia in this book, I absolutely loved the way that that was handled, and just the character work with Leia and the politics of it, seeing this era of Star Wars in between episodes 6 and 7, which I have not experienced much of, and as far as I'm aware is one of the lesser fleshed out periods in terms of like directly leading into the sequel trilogy, that kind of period of time. Just getting more of that was really cool, and seeing, you know, Leia in this situation and everything, just super well done. Absolutely loved this book. It's another one of those ones where I was just hooked on it from the beginning, and obviously written by Claudia Gray, so I fully expected that, and yeah. If you're a Star Wars fan and you haven't read this book, I would highly recommend doing so, especially if you're a fan of Leia. Next up, we've got the short story that I referenced earlier, which is related to the Ballad of Black Tom because this is a Lovecraft short story, which is the Call of Cthulhu. Now, I actually had a hard time picking a favorite Lovecraft story. I knew I wanted to include one on this list, but picking my favorite of his stories is rather difficult for me. But I decided to go with Call of Cthulhu for a handful of reasons. First of all, it's the first one that I ever read. So it holds kind of a special place for me. It's also one of my favorites, at least. And it's also, you know, the big recognizable one. And I just think all those things combined really makes me appreciate this story a lot. And it's one that when I have reread Lovecraft, which I haven't done very much, but this is one that I really enjoyed rereading. It's one that I enjoy hearing people analyze. And I just think that the story of it is very interesting, where you have this person who finds these belongings of his passed away relative, who was knowing certain things about this cult of Cthulhu and all the stuff that goes on. This story very nicely wraps in just about everything that I love about Lovecraft into this one story, which is another reason why I wanted to include this one. But if you're curious of other stories I considered, I also really like At the Mountains of Madness and Through the Gates of the Silver Key, Shadow over Innsmouth, lots of other ones. This is the one I decided to pick though. And yeah, It's one of my favorite Lovecraft stories for sure, and I love it a lot. Really kind of sticking with the Lovecraftian theme here for this next one. This one is The Fisherman by John Langan. This one is not as directly Lovecraftian, maybe. You know, there's no direct connections to the Cthulhu mythos or anything, but it does have a somewhat Lovecraftian twist to it. This is one that I read a couple years ago and I absolutely loved. This story is the story of two men who are grieving after the loss of their loved ones, bond together through fishing, and learn about this story about the town that they are in, and weird stuff going on with that. And this book examines the idea and the theme of grief, first of all, but also the lengths that one would go to bring someone back that they love in order to see them again and to be able to be with them again, and the kind of horrible things that can happen, and the things that you can do in order to do something like that, and just stuff like that is just really wonderfully done. This is one of the books on this list, I would say, that most emotionally impacted me. I still think about this book regularly, and it's been almost 2 years since I read it. Probably about 1.5 years, actually, if I were to guess. This book just comes up in my thoughts regularly, and it's one that really deeply impacted me emotionally, and it really made me feel things. That's a big thing that a lot of these books do that I have in this list, is books that really made me feel something emotionally, and this book had that in spades. I would highly recommend reading this book because it is, first of all, just an amazing tale about this town and weird stuff that happens. It's definitely, you know, if you're not into horror or things that are a little creepy, this is not outright terrifying or anything, but if you don't want to be creeped out, maybe don't read this book. But there's some weird, creepy stuff in this book, very existential at times, very, again, dealing with themes of grief. It's a very heavy book in terms of theming and all that kind of thing, so definitely keep that in mind if you read it. But if you do read it, I think it will definitely impact you in some way, hopefully, because it really did for me. Next, we have a book from the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, which is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I actually... This is a weird one for me because this is not actually my favorite Narnia book. I would say this is probably my third favorite Narnia book, behind The Silver Chair and Prince Caspian, actually. But I include this one in this list because if I were to narrow it down to include on a list like this of my favorite books of all time, this is the one that I would point to because it's the first one I read, it's the one that I loved as a kid, and this book just had a huge impact on me growing up, and this series in general did, but this book especially. And so that's the reason I'm including this rather than those other books, which I may like a little bit more. But The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, as I said, is just one of those books that I grew up reading. It's one of the few books that really kind of shaped me growing up. And it's the only one on this list that I did not read in the last few years also. But it's one of those books that just really sparked my imagination when I was young. Even going into other media, like the movie from 2005, 2006, whenever that came out, that also did that for me. But even the book itself just sparked my imagination, really kind of filled me with wonder and happiness, and made me very interested in fantasy as a concept of these other worlds that are filled with magic and wonder and amazing things, and just really had a big impact on me growing up, as well as the deeper themes of this book of, you know, obviously there's some very heavy-handed Christian themes in this book, but I'm not really so much talking about that as I am, I mean, I guess it kind of is, but talking about the themes of things like redemption and of, you know, even if you mess up, you know, you can come back from that and be a better person. Things like that really resonated with me and still resonate with me to this day. And I just love this book a lot. I love this series a lot. And so that's why it's on this list. The next one I'm including, I am kind of cheating on because it's technically 3 books, but in my mind I think of it as 1 book, and it was originally intended as 1 book. And that is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I can't say anything about this book that hasn't been said before, so I'll probably keep this one relatively brief. This is the first adult fantasy that I ever read. When I was getting into fantasy, I figured if I was going to start anywhere, I might as well start with Tolkien. And so I started with this and The Hobbit. And I loved it first time around, read it again recently just a couple months ago, loved it as well the second time around. And this is just a classic. Established so many things about fantasy that I love now. Is just such a great story, and includes some characters that I love, some incredible world building across not just this, but the wider works of Middle-earth. But even just in Lord of the Rings, the world building is amazing, and very vivid. And I love the writing style in this book as well. Tolkien, in terms of prose, is probably my favorite writer, just purely talking in terms of prose style. And I just love the experience of reading this book. Yeah, just a great all-around book. Again, can't say anything about it that hasn't been said already. If you want to know my favorite book in Lord of the Rings, it's probably The Two Towers. It's probably my favorite of the movies as well. But yeah, just in general, Lord of the Rings definitely makes this list for many reasons. Those of you who regularly watch my channel have probably been wondering when Brandon Sanderson was going to appear here, because he's my favorite author of all time. This is that point. I picked Oathbringer. Oathbringer is my favorite of Sanderson's books. Oathbringer, if I were to rank these books, Oathbringer would probably be number one, because it is my favorite Sanderson book. Sanderson's my favorite author. Stormlight Archive is my favorite series, so this book naturally kind of just fits into the number one slot. I love this book so much, for so many reasons. The character work in this book is amazing. I will say the one downside that I can think of for this book, aside from anything I may have said in my review, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but the one downside I can think of immediately, Kaladin, my favorite character in the series, does not get a whole lot to do in this book, at least that I found interesting, but everything else about this book works for me. The character work with Dalinar in this book, who is this person who is trying to bring people together in order to face this wider threat, is amazing. And getting his backstory, which is so tragic and just really hit me emotionally once again, amazing. The world building in this book is a bit slower, but it really kind of lets a lot of the world building and the character work shine. All that stuff is amazing. The ending of this book, the climax of this book, what we Sanderson fans often call the Sanderlanche of the book, is like 300 pages long, and it is amazing. Loved it all the way through. So many incredible character moments. This book made me cry several times towards the end of the book, and I think even early on in the book as well. And just, I love this book so much. It's extremely long, there's a whole lot to it, but it was so well worth reading. And it is, without a doubt, at least one of my favorite books of all time, if not my absolute number one favorite. We're getting close to the end now with my second to last book that I have to talk about, which is a Discworld book by Terry Pratchett. I went with Reaper Man. I have read so far 3 Discworld books, and this is my favorite of the 3. I did want to include a Terry Pratchett book on here because I love reading them, and this book, again, kind of similar to the other ones, really did affect me emotionally, really made me think, really enjoyed a lot of the deeper themes in this book. And also just made me laugh out loud so many times. Like, Terry Pratchett is one of those authors where if you read him, you can probably expect to be laughing throughout the duration of the book. Just incredible humor, incredible character moments and emotional moments. Like, this book, I think, better than a lot of other books that I've read. I mean, obviously there are other books I've read that I thought were funny and also emotional, but Terry Pratchett, just based on the few books that I've read, and especially this one, to me, just seems like one of those authors that can simultaneously make you laugh and really pull at your heartstrings within the same book, within even just a page or something like that, and I just think that's amazing. And I really love this book a lot. I cannot wait to continue the Death series within Discworld. So I included it in this list. The final book on my list is the second Star Wars book that I talked about. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you may expect me to say one of the Darth Bane trilogy books, because I have said before that that is my favorite trilogy, and Path of Destruction in the past was probably my favorite Legends book. Nowadays, it still maybe is. It's hard for me to decide, but I decided to go with a different one for this pick, and that is Traitor from the New Jedi Order by Matthew Stover. This is just an amazing book. I love it so much. And again, similar to a lot of the other ones that I've talked about, just really resonated with me emotionally at multiple moments for multiple reasons. Really made me think a lot. You know, this deals a lot with morality and the nature of the Force and things like that, which I really enjoyed. It's a very dark book. but it's one that I found very thought-provoking and very interesting, and one that I just would read and I just like to ponder for a while. Um, and the ending of this book also. This book takes a character who I previously liked, but I was not super into, and made me weep for that character. Like, literally, I cried at the end of this book. And that was just an amazing thing for me. And again, kind of similar to Tolkien, the writing style here is just amazing and really enhanced everything that the book was doing. Like the themes and the storyline and the character work all were heightened by the writing itself, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite Legends books. I have a hard time saying if it is my favorite, even though it's the one I'm including here, just because I love so many Legends books, but I decided to give it to this one because this one I just absolutely loved, and again, kind of similar to some of the other ones I talked about, I still think about often, and dealt with a lot of things that I thought were really interesting and engaging and all that kind of thing. So that's why I included that on my list as well. That pretty much wraps up my list, my 10 favorite books at the moment that I have read in my life, basically. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these, if you would include any of these on your list, or if you, whatever you thought of these books. And if you have any particular favorite books that have really stuck with you or resonated with you in your life, let me know in the comments what those would be as well. And I fully expect this list to change in the coming few years as I read more. Obviously, like I said, I still, I've read quite a bit, but I have not read nearly as much as a lot of other people, especially here on BookTube. So I fully expect this list to change over time. But as of right now, this is what it looks like. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.